Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Panay. Today we'll be discussing crucifixion, the symbology of the crucifixion in the course, and how we crucify ourselves and others on a daily basis. I'll be reading from an essay I wrote called Good God, and it is taken from my book, The Bridge of Return, A Course in Miracles as a Western Yoga. And after I read the essay, we'll be looking at a lesson from the course's workbook, number 196, and it's called It Can Be But Myself I Crucify. Let's get stuck into the essay. Good God. It's fair to say I was an impressionable child with an active imagination. Add a traditional Catholic education into the mix, and a few nightmares were bound to emerge. In one religion-inspired dream, remembered for its emotional impact, I stood alone in a large room. It was an art gallery with rows of freestanding walls you could zigzag your way around. On the walls hung paintings that were all slightly different, yet depicted the same essential thing, a crucified Jesus. I didn't like the paintings. They were dark and gruesome, yet there was no avoiding them. Suddenly I was overcome with the sense that a murderer was in the room. Terrified, I began running down every aisle, trying to get away from the unseen threat. That's when I awoke, in a cold sweat. This childhood nightmare reflected my thoughts of God as a persecutor, a murderer. I was terrified of him. God sent Jesus to die for your sins, is the Christian teaching. Jesus was the sacrificial lamb God sent to be dragged through the streets, jeered at and tortured, all because someone had to pay for our guilt. But it wasn't just Jesus' crucifixion that gave God his fearful reputation. The Bible is full of stories depicting a wrathful God. As a child, I was gripped by the Passover story, in which God sends the angel of death to kill the firstborn males to persuade the Pharaoh to release the enslaved Israelites. My childhood imagination was spinning with this one, an angel of death, striking people dead at midnight, lamb's blood smeared on doorsteps so the angel would pass over Israelite homes. This God sure knew how to build drama. Yet you don't have to be Christian or brought up in an old-school Catholic environment to fear God. You just have to believe that you are a person in a body vulnerable to forces beyond your control. You just have to see an unkind, uncertain world. If God is the creator, he must be cruel to make us endure it. Many Christians have tried to argue the opposite, that the suffering inherent in life is allowed by God for our own good. Indeed, the English poet John Milton wrote his epic Paradise Lost to justify the ways of God, in his words. In particular, he wanted to reconcile the idea of a loving God with one who sentenced his own creation to death and a life of toil and suffering, and his only son to be nailed to a cross. It's a great poem, but even so, no one can justify the unjustifiable. As A Course in Miracles says of this world, quote, "If this were the real world, God would be cruel, for no father could subject his children to this as the price of salvation and be loving. Love does not kill to save. If it did, attack would be salvation, and this is the ego's interpretation, not God's." End of quote. In a television program I saw recently about a maternity hospital, a doctor was standing at a humidicrib as a premature baby took their last breath. The doctor held back tears and looked very stern. Later, when interviewed, he said he'd just felt angry. I had also felt angry as I'd watched that scene in the neonatal care unit. Why did such a young being have to die? Somewhere in the recesses of my mind was the idea of a cruel God letting this happen. So this is despite all my years of studying A Course in Miracles and learning that God isn't a cruel God at all, somewhere in the recesses of my unconscious, because I still believe in the ego thought system to some extent. Otherwise, I'd be free of pain and suffering and always in peace, which I'm not. Somewhere in the recess of my mind was still this idea of a cruel God letting us suffer. The good thing about seeing this television show is it showed me that I still have that idea there. Carrying on with the essay, in the course's metaphysics, the world exists apart from God. He did not create it, yet we can express God's will here by practicing forgiveness, thereby extending love. A major part of this process involves becoming aware of and reassessing our ideas about God. Subtitle: Cruel to be kind. To say God sacrificed his only son, his innocent son, for our sake is like saying he was cruel to be kind. We likewise take this line of thinking on board, thinking it's okay to lash out at someone when they appear to be doing the wrong thing, reasoning it will do them good, or they might learn a lesson. Quote from the Course: Persecution frequently results in an attempt to justify the terrible misperception that God himself persecuted his own son on behalf of salvation. In milder forms, a parent says, "This hurts me more than it hurts you," and feels exonerated in beating a child. Can you believe our Father really thinks this way? It is so essential that all such thinking be dispelled that we must be sure that nothing of this kind remains in your mind. End of quote. I remember my intimidating high school physics teacher raging at me for a lacklustre exam performance. When I scored highly on a later exam, she said proudly, "See, a little yelling and you do better." This really annoyed me because I knew the difference in my marks had nothing to do with being yelled at. We had started a new topic that I naturally grasped better, but the cruel to be kind justification is prevalent and reflects the Machiavellian idea that the end justifies the means. Is it any wonder that Machiavelli was an advisor to tyrants? According to A Course in Miracles, the message of the crucifixion wasn't that Jesus was sacrificed because we were bad. Instead, the message relates to Jesus' reactions to the attacks on his body. Quote, "Assault can ultimately be made only on the body. There is little doubt that one body can assault another and can even destroy it. Yet if destruction itself is impossible, anything that is destructible cannot be real. Its destruction, therefore, does not justify anger." End of quote. Jesus didn't respond with anger to the attacks directed toward him because he knew he wasn't a body. Instead of being a symbol of our guilt, the message of the crucifixion is, "Teach only love, for that is what you are." In the Course, Jesus tells us he doesn't call for martyrs, but for teachers. We're not asked to be sacrificial, but to follow his loving example in the face of attacks, and we do this by not using them to justify anger. Quote, "My one lesson, which I must teach as I learned it, is that no perception that is out of accord with the judgment of the Holy Spirit can be justified. I undertook to show this was true in an extreme case, merely because it would serve as a good teaching aid to those whose temptation to give in to anger and assault would not be so extreme." End of quote. People attack others because they feel guilty and are frightened. Jesus saw the fear behind the actions of his persecutors. To respond this way is certainly a tall order, and we're likely to fall into the trap of denial if we think we shouldn't feel angry. The problem doesn't lie in being angry so much as in trying to justify our anger. Most likely our initial response to certain things will involve irritation, impatience, envy, you name it. Progress lies in remembering that our feelings represent a choice and can't be justified by what has gone on around us. Every time we remember this, we open our mind to the Holy Spirit's healing and Jesus' message on the cross. Teach only love, for that is what you are. We mightn't be ready to accept this as the truth, but at least we're open to the possibility that there's another way of perceiving. And by working through our attack thoughts, withdrawing our projections, seeing our self-accusations and asking for help to let them go, we undo our fear of God. Subtitle: The God of Love. And this section begins with a quote from Julian of Norwich from her book Revelations of Divine Love. Quote, "We may never come to full knowing of God till we know first clearly our own soul." End of quote. Though the biblical God is punitive and vengeful, his dark side is conspicuously absent in the writings of Christian mystics. Instead, the mystics speak of a loving God of mercy. As Carl Jung wrote of the 14th century mystic Meister Eckhart, quote, "Strangely appealing is Eckhart's sense of an inner affinity with God when contrasted with the Christian sense of sin. We feel ourselves transported back into the spacious atmosphere of the Upanishads." End of quote. There is nothing harsh in Eckhart's words addressing the fallen. Instead, he consoles and reassures, perhaps suggesting he'd been through a redemptive process himself in which he was met with love instead of condemnation. While other Christian mystics such as St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila write of the love of God, they also detail the trials they suffered along the way to greater union with the divine, and these involved coming face to face with their ego. There is a sense of sin that accompanies ego identification. It is the shame and guilt of believing you are an autonomous self, living apart from God. What the mystics offer us is a glimpse of the totally loving nature of God, having shed their shame and guilt through purgation. And purgation meaning the fire of cleansing themselves of all their ego thoughts and desires. Gratitude is a central component of the mystical experience. As the Course says, gratitude goes hand in hand with love and with the realisation that, quote, "we are separate from no living thing and therefore one with Him, God." End of quote. In contrast, when we identify with the ego, we're prone to feel deprived, unfairly treated, and persecuted by whatever goes on in our day. Feeling alone and unsupported, depressed and anxious, we think no one in heaven or on earth cares much about us. We have to deal with our health issues, financial problems, and relationship woes, all on our own. What an immense struggle when we have, quote, "a self-perception which regards us in a place of merciless pursuit, where we are badgered ceaselessly and pushed around without a thought or care for us or for our future." End of quote. Through using each circumstance to practice forgiveness and remember the truth about God and ourself, our spiritual self, we move from feelings of persecution and deprivation to gratitude. The world as we experience it then takes on a glass half full rather than half empty quality. And to paraphrase the Course, our learning time is shortened by more than we can ever dream of. And that is the end of the essay. Firstly, I'd like to point out that sentence where it says, "what an immense struggle when we have a self-perception which regards us in a place of merciless pursuit." That reminds me of my dream, where I'm running through the gallery, scared that there is a murderer in there and I've got to get away from them. All of us in the world, through our suffering, our fears, and all the impingements that we feel upon us, feel that we are being crucified. And that is why the Course says, "in crucifixion is redemption laid." So it's in all of our suffering that we call for help. And redemption, the redemptive process of the Course, where what is redeemed really is our identification with our spiritual self and that sense of wholeness and innocence. That is redeemed out of our experience of suffering, because it's that which initiates or motivates us to engage in the Course's healing process, which is forgiveness. Now I'm going to read some extracts from lesson 196 in the Course, which is called "It Can Be But Myself I Crucify." And this will help to lend another layer of meaning to the dream I read out earlier. Okay, lesson 196, "It Can Be But Myself I Crucify," paragraph 1. When this is firmly understood and kept in full awareness, you will not attempt to harm yourself, nor make your body slave to vengeance. You will not attack yourself, and you will realise that to attack another is but to attack yourself. So that is the reason why it says, "It can be but myself I crucify." So if I attack someone else, we do that when we see them as guilty. And if you're attacking them, you are accusing them of being the murderer, the one that really, that crucified God, really, that destroyed God's oneness. And so you are nailing them to a cross. But what it's saying is, but if you are accusing them and attacking them and nailing them to a cross, you are saying the separation is real. And so you therefore are also nailing yourself to a cross. So I'll read this paragraph again. When this is firmly understood and kept in full awareness that it can be but yourself you crucify, you will not attempt to harm yourself nor make your body slave to vengeance. You will not attack yourself, and you will realise that to attack another is but to attack yourself. And that other part where it says you will not attack yourself, that is also making your body a slave to vengeance. So you won't harm yourself to say, behold me, brother, at your hands I die. Behind every self-sabotaging behaviour, there will be somebody that you can point to. Usually it's the parents, the authority figures, because they're the greatest representation of God in our minds, in our unconscious. We can point a finger to them and saying, you, the way you treated me is the way I'm treating myself this way now. So you're using your body as vengeance. And it's vengeance because it says, behold me, brother, at your hand I am suffering. And that is another way of accusing them and nailing them to the cross. So many ways to nail other people and ourselves to the cross of crucifixion and suffering. Okay, carrying on. You will be free of the insane belief that to attack a brother saves yourself. Again, if you realise that it can be but yourself you crucify. And you will understand his safety is your own, and in his healing you are healed. Now I'm going to skip to paragraph 5. The dreary, hopeless thought that you can make attacks on others and escape yourself has nailed you to the cross. Perhaps it seems to be salvation, yet it merely stood for the belief the fear of God is real. And what is that but hell? Who could believe his Father is his deadly enemy, separate from him, and waiting to destroy his life and blot him from the universe without the fear of hell upon his heart? Such is the form of madness you believe if you accept the fearful thought you can attack another and be free yourself. Until this form is changed, there is no hope. Until you see that this, at least, must be entirely impossible, how could there be escape? The fear of God is real to anyone who thinks this thought is true, and he will not perceive its foolishness, or even see that it is there so that it would be possible to question it. So the fear of God is real to anyone who thinks that they can attack someone else and escape the effects of that attack and not be attacking themselves in the process. So anyone who thinks I can attack you and not be attacking myself is saying we are separate and the separation is real. And if you believe that, the fear of God will be very strong. You will believe that God is out to get you. Carrying on now to paragraph 9. Salvation's song can certainly be heard in the idea we practice for today. If it can be but you crucify, you did not hurt the world and need not fear its vengeance and pursuit. So, if it is but you crucify, you're not harming the other person because your thoughts cannot harm the other person. They can only remind them, your thoughts can only either remind them of what is true about themselves or just remind them of the ego thought system. And if they're wanting to be reminded of that, they'll be reminded of that anyway. I mean, the power of decision lies with everybody. So the power of decision lies with them as to whether they will choose to listen to the ego or the Holy Spirit in interpreting our behaviour. But what we do to a body, so this, when it's saying, if it can be but you crucify, you did not hurt the world and need not fear its vengeance and pursuit. Anything you do in the world, you can harm bodies. But this is talking about the ultimate metaphysics. If there is no world, there are no bodies, you cannot do anything to harm the world, because ultimately none of that is true. but you can harm yourself by your actions, by what you are affirming about yourself and about the world and about others, because you're affirming something about God, the fearful God. And you're going to keep that idea of a fearful God in your mind. And so you will want to stay away from him. And therefore, salvation's door is closed to you, or you'll perceive it's close to you. And there's no way out then. So I'm going to read that paragraph again. Salvation's song can certainly be heard in the idea we practice for today. If it can be but you crucify, you did not hurt the world, and need not fear its vengeance and pursuit. Nor need you hide in terror from the deadly fear of God projection hides behind. So it's our projection of our guilt onto God. So we feel guilty for the separation, and then we project that thought of separation onto God and accuse him of being a wrathful God who cast us out of heaven and now wants to destroy us, is out to crucify us for our act of rebellion. However, this line is very interesting, this following line. The thing you dread the most is your salvation. You are strong, and it is strength you want, and you are free and glad of freedom. However, you have sought to be both weak and bound because you feared your strength and freedom, yet salvation lies in them. So we fear our strength and our freedom for a couple of reasons. One is because in them is the death of the ego, is letting go of our special self, letting go of our character armour, letting go of how we feel better than other people, of how we feel worse than other people, letting go of that super self-consciousness or self-centeredness. And we are afraid to let it go, that it's the devil we know. But the other reason we're afraid of our strength and our freedom is because our strength and our freedom lie within our mind. And once we realise that it's our thoughts that harm us, it's only our thoughts by which we crucify ourselves, we bring back the knowledge of our power and our strength to us, and that it resides in the mind. However, that is also terrifying, as we'll see in the next paragraph, paragraph 10. There is an instant in which terror seems to grip your mind so wholly that escape appears quite hopeless. When you realise once and for all that it is you fear, the mind perceives itself as split. So now we realise, oh, I don't fear a fearful God. My fear is coming from within my mind. And I don't fear a fearful world. The fear is coming from within my mind. Back to the paragraph. And this had been concealed while you believed attack could be directed outward and return from outward to within. It seemed to be an enemy outside you had to fear, and thus a God outside yourself became your mortal enemy, the source of fear. Now, for an instant, is a murderer perceived within you, eager for your death, intent on plotting punishment for you until the time when it can kill at last. So back to my dream where I'm running through the gallery with all the crucifixion pictures around the place, and I know, oh, there's a murderer in there. Really, the murderer ultimately that I'm afraid of is me. It's within me. Now for an instant is a murderer perceived within you, eager for your death, intent on plotting punishment for you until the time when it can kill at last. So I realised God isn't the bad agent, isn't the one to be feared. It's me, it's my ego. I'm the one who is the inverted commas bad guy. And that is the real terror. You know, the bad guy is closer than home to us. At least if we say it's God, we can project it out a little. But now we realise it's us. You can't get closer than close. You can't get closer to yourself than yourself. But again, it's the ego in us we realise is the agent of all the murderousness and all the hate and all the fear. But there's good news, so let's carry on. Yet in this instant is the time as well in which salvation comes, for fear of God has disappeared. And you can call on him to save you from illusions by his love, calling him Father and yourself his Son. So now there's a remedy. As long as you perceive the evil or the murderousness, the hateful figure to be outside of yourself, there is no remedy, because you can't call on God for help. You fear him. You think he's the bad guy. And you keep reinforcing this whenever you crucify anybody else as being the bad guy, because you're making separation real. You keep reinforcing the hateful, wrathful God idea. But once you realise that the bad guy, the murderer that you really, really fear, that you've built up this idea about, is you, is your ego and its belief, the whole belief in separation. So it's not really you, it's your identification with the ego and the belief in its thought system of separation, that murderousness that is at the heart of the ego thought system. Yes, that's awful, because you're no longer just able to kid yourself that you're the face of innocence. But at the same time, now you can ask God for help, because he's no longer the tyrant that doesn't wish good things for you. He becomes the loving Father that can help you. Again, in crucifixion is redemption laid. Carrying on. Pray that the instant may be soon. Today, step back from fear and make advance to love. There is no thought of God that does not go with you to help you reach that instant and to go beyond it quickly, surely, and forever. When the fear of God is gone, there are no obstacles that still remain between you and the holy peace of God. How kind and merciful is the idea we practice. Give it welcome, as you should, for it is your release. It is indeed but you your mind can try to crucify. Yet your redemption too will come from you. I hope this discussion has been of help for you. Tune in again. Bye.